How did one bold decision ignite a political wildfire? Keir Starmer's latest move might just be his most controversial yet, slashing the UK's international aid budget from 0.5% to 0.3% of GDP. Why? To boost defence spending. But this decision has set off a storm of backlash, and in the next few minutes, we'll show you exactly how Starmer's aid cut is spiralling out of control, from outraged MPs to global criticism. Stay tuned as we unpack this shocking turn of events. So, Keir Starmer's grand plan is to shrink the UK's international aid budget, a budget that was already reduced from the 0.7% of GDP the UK had long committed to. And now, it's dropping even further to 0.3%. The reason? Starmer wants to increase defence spending, and apparently, foreign aid is the first casualty. Sounds like a tough, pragmatic move, but it's also a decision that's turning allies into critics and supporters into skeptics. Let's break this down. Labour previously promised to restore the aid budget back to 0.7%, a commitment Starmer himself backed. And yet, here we are, watching him take a sharp U-turn. It's like promising to fix the roof and then setting the house on fire. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Aid organisations, development experts, and even Labour's own MPs are calling this a betrayal of the UK's role in global development. Adding fuel to the fire, prominent Labour figures are openly criticising this decision. Senior MPs are accusing Starmer of undermining the UK's global standing and moral leadership. Even the international community isn't staying silent. Global development partners and humanitarian organisations are expressing concern that the UK is abandoning its commitments when the world needs it most. But there's more. Military experts are questioning whether this budget shuffle even makes sense. Sure, boosting defence spending might sound like a strongman move, but slashing foreign aid could destabilise regions and increase global insecurity, the very thing defence spending aims to prevent. It's like cutting off your supply lines to buy more swords. And let's not forget the money. Chancellor Rachel Reeves is already under pressure to balance the books, and now she's expected to stretch the budget even thinner. Cutting aid might save some cash, but the long-term costs, in terms of global influence, diplomatic relationships, and moral responsibility, could be far higher. The cracks within Labour are showing. MPs who once stood united behind Starmer are now scrambling to distance themselves from this decision. Shadow cabinet members are sending mixed messages, creating confusion and discord. It's a spectacle of political disarray, with Starmer's leadership being questioned more fiercely than ever. Starmer's decision to cut the UK's international aid budget has sparked outrage at home and abroad. It's a move that breaks promises, undermines global development, and fractures his own party. And for what? A defence boost with no clear strategy. Is this really the bold leadership the UK needs right now? Labour's cash for access controversy is shaking Westminster to its core, and it could spell disaster for Keir Starmer's government. In the next few minutes, we'll take you inside this unfolding crisis, from furious MPs to public outrage. What's at stake? How did it all go so wrong? Stay tuned as we unpack this shocking mess. So, Labour's Lord's Chief Whip Roy Kennedy has found himself in the middle of a scandal. And trust me, it's not a good look. We're talking about a cash for access controversy where Labour peer Lord David Evans allegedly offered access to government ministers in exchange for £25,000 sponsorship deals. Yeah, you heard that right. Pay up, and you get to rub shoulders with those in power. If that doesn't scream corruption, I don't know what does. Let's break this down. Labour, the party that promised transparency and integrity, is now accused of selling influence. Lord Evans reportedly pitched this deal to potential sponsors, suggesting they could get exclusive access to key decision-makers at private events. Sounds more like a VIP club than a functioning democracy, doesn't it? And the worst part? This isn't some rogue backbencher. This involves the Lord's Chief Whip, a senior official who's supposed to uphold party discipline and standards. Adding fuel to the fire, critics are already calling this a betrayal of public trust. Labour campaigned on cleaning up politics, but this scandal makes it look like they're just cashing in on it. Even some Labour MPs are distancing themselves from this mess. Shadow cabinet members are scrambling to control the damage, but the cracks are already showing. And it's not just the politicians who are angry. Voters who believed Labour stood for fairness and accountability are feeling duped. Social media is blowing up with demands for resignations and independent investigations. The phrase, same old politics, is being thrown around a lot, and that's the last thing Starmer's government needs right now. Let's talk fallout. Senior figures like Chancellor Rachel Reeves and Foreign Secretary David Lammy are reportedly fuming behind the scenes. There are whispers of internal clashes and calls for Roy Kennedy to step down. And with the opposition pouncing on this scandal, it's open season on Labour's credibility. But here's the real kicker. This cash for access scandal doesn't just damage Labour's reputation, it undermines the entire political system. When access to power comes with a price tag, democracy takes a back seat. And if Starmer doesn't handle this swiftly and decisively, his promises of a new kind of politics will ring hollow. So where does this leave Labour? In damage control mode, desperately trying to put out the fire before it spreads any further. But the question remains, can they salvage their credibility, or is this scandal the beginning of the end for Starmer's vision of clean governance? And that's not all. Wes Streeting's latest confession might just be the crack Labour didn't want exposed. The senior Labour figure has admitted the party has failed to properly engage with Muslim communities in recent years, and the backlash has been immediate. In the next few minutes, we'll show you exactly how this revelation has unleashed a wave of criticism and why Labour's efforts to fix it might be too little, too late. Stay tuned as we take you behind the scenes of this political storm. So, Wes Streeting finally said the quiet part out loud. Labour has dropped the ball with Muslim communities. Yeah, you heard that right. The party that claims to stand for inclusivity has been accused of sidelining one of the UK's most significant minority groups. And now, they're scrambling to pick up the pieces. Let's break this down. Streeting's big solution? The British Muslim Network, a new initiative aimed at building dialogue between Muslim communities and policymakers. Sounds promising, right? But here's the problem. Trust takes years to build and seconds to break. After years of neglect, many see this as a desperate PR move rather than a genuine attempt at reconciliation. And the criticism isn't just coming from the outside. Labour's own members are calling this too little, too late. Party insiders are questioning why it took so long for this issue to be acknowledged, and whether the leadership really understands the depth of frustration within these communities. But the real kicker? Streeting's pledge comes amid a backdrop of growing discontent. Muslim voters have been drifting away from Labour, frustrated by what they see as a lack of representation and action on issues that matter to them. And while the British Muslim Network might be a step in the right direction, many wonder if it's just another empty promise. So where does this leave Labour? Facing a trust deficit that won't be easy to fix. Streeting's honesty might have opened the door to change, but it also laid bare just how much work there is to do. And with an election on the horizon, Labour's relationship with Muslim communities could be a deciding factor. That's not all of it. Peter Kyle's latest move could be the biggest misstep of his career. The technology secretary's close ties to major AI companies are raising serious questions, and the backlash is only getting louder. In the next few minutes, we'll take you behind the scenes of this brewing storm, from furious artists to worried legal experts. How did we get here? What's at stake? Stay tuned as we break down this unfolding controversy. So, Peter Kyle's brilliant new idea is to let AI companies use copyrighted works without explicit permission. Yeah, you heard that right. The man who's supposed to protect innovation and creativity has decided it's open season on intellectual property. It's like handing out the keys to the art gallery and saying, take whatever you like. Let's break this down. Kyle's proposal would allow AI developers to train their systems on copyrighted books, music, films, and artwork without asking the creators first. Sounds great for big tech, right? But for the artists, writers, and musicians who rely on their work for a living, this is nothing short of theft dressed up as innovation. And they're not staying quiet about it. Prominent voices from the creative industry are already sounding the alarm. Acclaimed authors, celebrated musicians, and award-winning filmmakers are calling this a disaster for intellectual property rights. Imagine spending years perfecting your craft only to have a machine replicate your style without credit or compensation. That's the dystopian future Kyle's pushing us toward. But it's not just the artists who are furious. Legal experts are warning that this move could lead to an avalanche of copyright lawsuits. The UK's current copyright laws are clear. Creators own their work. Kyle's proposal undermines that foundation, opening the door to legal chaos and international disputes. And here's the kicker. This isn't just about creativity. It's about power. Big tech's influence over government policy has never been more obvious. Kyle's cozy relationship with AI giants like OpenAI and DeepMind is raising eyebrows across Westminster. Critics are accusing him of putting corporate interests ahead of the public good, turning his office into a mouthpiece for Silicon Valley. Even within his own party, support for Kyle is crumbling. Labour backbenchers are reportedly furious, worried this policy will alienate the very people they claim to stand up for: working artists and small businesses. Shadow ministers are distancing themselves, trying to avoid the fallout from what's quickly becoming a political firestorm. And let's not forget the international stage. The UK's creative industry is one of the most respected in the world. By undermining copyright protections, Kyle risks damaging the country's reputation as a defender of intellectual property rights. Allies in the EU and beyond are watching closely, and they're not impressed. So, what happens next? Pressure is mounting for Kyle to walk back this disastrous policy, but big tech isn't likely to give up without a fight. With billions at stake, this battle is only just beginning. And as the storm rages on, one thing's clear: Peter Kyle's judgment is under serious scrutiny. Keir Starmer's government is facing yet another storm, and this one's about the UK's aid budget. Just when you thought the controversies couldn't pile up any higher, here comes the bombshell. Nearly half of the UK's already reduced aid budget is set to be spent not on helping developing nations but on housing asylum seekers in British hotels. Yes, you heard that right. Funds meant for global development are being diverted to domestic expenses, and the backlash is already fierce. Let's break down what's really happening. The UK's aid budget was already slashed from 0.7% to 0.5% of GDP, a cut that drew heavy criticism worldwide. Now, with reports indicating that almost 50% of what's left will be funneled into the domestic asylum system, the outrage is hitting new heights. This isn't just a budgetary decision. It's a fundamental shift in the UK's role on the global stage. And for many, it's a betrayal of promises made. Critics are lining up. Humanitarian organizations argue that this move undermines efforts to fight poverty and support development in some of the world's most vulnerable regions. Imagine the impact. Vital health programs, educational initiatives, and infrastructure projects losing funding because the money is being redirected to cover the cost of hotel stays in Britain. It's a stark contrast to the UK's long-standing commitment to international aid. And it's not just charities speaking out. Political figures from across the spectrum are raising alarms. Senior Labour members, who once pledged to restore the aid budget to 0.7%, now find themselves accused of hypocrisy. Even within Labour's ranks, there's growing discomfort. MP Lisa Nandy warned that this approach risks damaging the UK's global reputation, while Tory critics see an opportunity to attack what they're calling Starmer's mismanagement. So why is this happening? The government's explanation is simple. The cost of accommodating asylum seekers has skyrocketed. With record numbers of people seeking refuge in the UK and a backlog of cases in the immigration system, hotel bills are mounting. But the question remains: should international aid money be used to fix a domestic crisis? The backlash is spreading fast. International partners who once viewed the UK as a leader in global development are expressing concern. The United Nations has hinted that this diversion of funds could violate the spirit of international aid agreements. Meanwhile, domestic critics worry that this sets a dangerous precedent, one where short-term political fixes take priority over long-term global commitments. As this controversy unfolds, one thing is clear: Keir Starmer's government is facing a storm of criticism from all sides. The decision to divert aid money for domestic use isn't just a financial move, it's a statement about the UK's priorities. And for many, That statement is deeply troubling. Stay tuned, because this debate is only getting started. Apart from it, Keir Starmer's government is facing a political firestorm, and this time, it's coming from inside his own party. The decision to slash the UK's overseas aid budget to boost defence spending has sparked outrage, not just from opposition benches, but from Labour's own ranks. Senior figures like Energy Secretary Ed Miliband are openly challenging the move, warning that it could have devastating consequences for developing nations and erode the UK's global influence. So how did we get here? And why is Starmer's latest policy sending shockwaves through his own party? Let's break it down. The UK's aid budget was already reduced to 0.5% of GDP under the previous government, with a promise from Labour to restore it to 0.7% when they came to power. But now, Starmer's administration has decided to cut it even further to 0.3%, redirecting the funds towards defence spending. On paper, it sounds like a move to bolster national security, but the reality is far more complicated. Critics argue that this decision undermines the UK's commitment to global development and humanitarian aid, areas where the nation has long been a leader. Ed Miliband hasn't minced words. The Energy Secretary has voiced serious reservations about the cuts, warning that they could severely impact efforts to combat poverty, support education, and provide healthcare in the world's most vulnerable regions. And he's not alone. Several Labour backbenchers have joined the chorus of discontent, accusing the government of betraying its pledges and prioritising short-term political gains over long-term global responsibilities. But it's not just Labour's internal divisions making headlines. International development experts and humanitarian organizations are also sounding the alarm. They argue that slashing aid spending sends a dangerous signal at a time when global crises, from conflict to climate change, demand solidarity and support. The UK's soft power, built on decades of diplomatic engagement and development leadership, risks being severely weakened. And let's talk numbers. The cut from 0.5% to 0.3% of GDP translates to billions of pounds stripped from aid programs, funds that would have gone to life-saving initiatives worldwide. The backlash has been swift and fierce, with critics calling it a short-sighted move that sacrifices global influence for domestic politics. So what's next for Starmer's government? With his own ministers speaking out and the international community watching closely, the pressure is mounting. The big question now: will Labour's leadership listen to the growing dissent within its ranks, or will this internal revolt mark the beginning of an even bigger crisis? Stay tuned, because this political drama is far from over. Just when you thought Keir Starmer's leadership couldn't get any more controversial, here comes another scandal, and this one's got everyone talking. The Prime Minister is under fire for accepting lavish gifts, including expensive designer clothing for his wife, courtesy of a wealthy Labour Party donor. It's the kind of political mess that raises serious questions about judgment, integrity, and those oh-so-important parliamentary rules. Let's break down exactly what happened. In September 2024, Starmer and his wife were reportedly gifted a selection of high-end clothing worth thousands of pounds. The source: a prominent Labour Party donor with deep pockets and, it seems, even deeper access to the country's most powerful politicians. Now, while there's nothing technically illegal about receiving gifts, the optics here are terrible. We're talking about a Prime Minister who's built his brand on transparency and accountability, and yet here he is, accepting freebies that scream privilege and elitism. Critics wasted no time in calling out the hypocrisy. How can Starmer claim to stand for ordinary working people while being draped in designer generosity? Conservative MPs were quick to pounce, with one backbencher describing the whole affair as a blatant conflict of interest. Even some within Labour's own ranks have expressed unease, worried that this scandal will overshadow the party's efforts to maintain a clean, reformist image. But it's not just about appearances. The real issue lies in the potential for influence. When a powerful donor showers the Prime Minister's family with expensive gifts, the obvious question arises: what do they expect in return? Access? Favours? Policy influence? Parliamentary rules exist for a reason, to prevent exactly this kind of ethical grey area. And yet, here we are. As the backlash grows, Starmer's team is scrambling to contain the damage. Statements of justification are being issued, assurances given that everything was declared properly, but the damage is done. The British public, already skeptical of politicians and their ties to wealthy benefactors, are seeing this as yet another example of the elite looking after their own. So where does this leave Starmer? In a precarious position, to say the least. With mounting pressure from both opposition and his own party, questions about his judgment and the influence of big donors aren't going away anytime soon. And if there's one thing voters hate, it's the whiff of entitlement from those who claim to represent them. Keir Starmer's strategy of staying on the sidelines during some of the UK's most heated labour disputes has ignited a political firestorm. The very unions that form the backbone of the Labour Party are now feeling sidelined and betrayed. As rail workers, NHS staff, and public sector employees took to the picket lines demanding fair pay and better working conditions, Starmer remained conspicuously silent, and that silence spoke volumes. It's no secret that the Labour Party has historically been the voice of the working class. But Starmer's reluctance to throw his weight behind striking workers has drawn intense criticism, not just from union leaders but from within his own ranks. Mick Lynch of the RMT union has been one of the most vocal critics, accusing Starmer of abandoning the very people Labour was created to represent. Lynch's frustration is echoed across the Labour movement, with union after union questioning where their supposed political ally stands. And it's not just about words, it's about actions. Starmer has reportedly instructed Labour MPs to steer clear of picket lines, a move that many see as a blatant attempt to distance the party from industrial action. This cautious approach might be aimed at preserving Labour's image as a responsible party ready for governance, but it's coming at a steep cost. The optics of a Labour leader refusing to back striking nurses and rail workers has not gone unnoticed by the public. Even within his own shadow cabinet, there's unrest. MPs who come from union-backed backgrounds are struggling to reconcile Starmer's strategy with the party's traditional principles. The result? A widening rift between Labour leadership and the unions who provide vital funding and grassroots support. Critics argue that Starmer's approach is all about electability, an effort to appeal to middle-ground voters who might be wary of perceived radicalism. But in doing so, he risks alienating Labour's core base. The very people who power the party's campaigns and provide its moral foundation are beginning to question if Starmer is truly on their side. As the strikes continue and the cost of living crisis deepens, the pressure on Starmer to take a clear stand is only mounting. Will he risk alienating unions further in pursuit of political centrism? Or will he finally step up and defend the workers Labour was built to support? One thing's for sure, the longer he stays silent, the louder the criticism becomes. Keir Starmer's latest Brexit blunder has got him in additional trouble, and this time, it's the Leave-supporting Labour voters who feel most betrayed. Just when Labour thought they could win back their traditional working-class base, Starmer's softening stance on Brexit threatens to tear that fragile support apart. So what exactly did Starmer do this time? Buckle up, because this political drama is about to get messy. For years, Starmer claimed Labour would respect the Brexit referendum result. But behind closed doors, it seems like a different story is unfolding. Leaked reports suggest Starmer is quietly pushing plans to align the UK more closely with EU policies, a move that's being seen as a backdoor attempt to reverse Brexit altogether. Even more controversial are murmurs of Labour's interest in rejoining the EU customs union, which would effectively tie Britain's hands when it comes to independent trade deals. Remember all those promises about taking back control? Well, it looks like Starmer's ready to hand it right back to Brussels. This perceived betrayal has not gone unnoticed. In Leave-leaning constituencies, the very areas Labour desperately needs to reclaim, voters are fuming. They see Starmer's EU-friendly approach as a direct insult to their democratic decision. After all, Brexit wasn't just about policy. It was about a fundamental belief in sovereignty and national independence. And yet, Starmer's vision seems determined to water that down. But it's not just the policy shifts sparking outrage, it's Starmer's rhetoric, too. Time and again, his comments on Brexit have come off as dismissive of Leave voters' concerns. He talks about the damage of Brexit and the need to repair ties with the EU, but where's the acknowledgement of why people voted to leave in the first place? For many working-class voters, Brexit was about jobs, identity, and a political system that finally listened to them. Starmer's failure to recognise that sentiment only deepens the growing divide between Labour and its traditional base. Even within his own party, cracks are starting to show. Labour MPs in Leave voting areas are growing increasingly uneasy, worried that Starmer's perceived backtracking could cost them dearly at the ballot box. And with the next general election looming closer, Labour can't afford to alienate the very voters they need to win back. So here's the big question. Is Starmer's gamble on softening Brexit worth the risk? Or is he driving yet another wedge between Labour and the people it claims to represent? One thing's for sure, this fight is far from over, and the political fallout could be explosive. And that's not all. Keir Starmer's leadership is in another crisis, and this one's about the very roof over people's heads. The UK is in the grips of an unprecedented housing and cost of living crisis, and Labour's failure to deliver on its promises is igniting fury among working-class voters. Let's start with the affordable housing crisis, or rather, the lack of affordable housing. Labour rode into power promising to fix the broken housing market, vowing to build thousands of new homes and make renting more affordable. But here we are, and those promises seem to be vanishing into thin air. House prices continue to soar, rents are climbing at record rates, and for many people, the dream of homeownership is slipping further out of reach. Where's the bold action Labour promised? Where's the support for struggling families crushed by rising costs? It's not just about homes, it's about survival. The cost of living crisis is tightening its grip on the nation. Inflation remains stubbornly high, energy bills are through the roof, and wages have barely budged. People are being forced to choose between heating their homes and feeding their families. And yet, Starmer's Labour seems more focused on optics than on offering real, tangible relief. Where's the comprehensive plan to tackle these issues head-on? Even Labour's core supporters are starting to lose faith. Working-class voters, the backbone of the party for generations, are feeling abandoned. They expected a leader who would fight for their interests, someone who would stand up to rising inequality and take decisive action. Instead, they see a party more concerned with appearing moderate and electable than with addressing the urgent needs of the people who put them in power. The frustration is building, and it's not just coming from the public. Labour MPs and grassroots organisers are sounding the alarm, warning that the party's failure to act could cost them dearly in the next election. Starmer's cautious approach may be backfiring, as voters grow increasingly impatient with half measures and empty rhetoric. So the question remains, how long can Labour ignore the housing and cost of living crisis before the political wildfire spreads beyond their control? The clock is ticking, and the pressure is mounting. If Starmer doesn't step up soon, the backlash could be catastrophic.